Hey everyone, Jack here, Avid Assistant. Now for the purposes of this video, wearing this t-shirt is going to be Jack from the future. Since while I was editing this video together, I noticed there was a few little things missing that really annoyed me and that I felt like had to be in there. Normally I would just put in one of my little Jack editing the video text pieces and explain what it is, but you know, some of these I felt like needed proper visually shown. So from time to time, I'll pop up in the video and just insert something that I think was missed. And the reason why I think some of these things were missed, partly because of massive sleep deprivation on my part, but also because I forgot to do the golden rule for me, which is before I start any task, which is make a list, a checklist, and then tick off the items as I do them. So I've got a rough outline of that checklist on my screen here now, and I'll cut to this and tick things off as we do it in the video, sort of retroactively ticking them off, as well as popping up in a few places to explain things that past Jack very badly forgot to explain the first time. So with that out of the way, let's get on with learning all about VFX turnovers. Hey everybody! My name is Jack, I'm the Avid Assistant, and today we're going to look at VFX turnovers. Now, if you're not familiar, you may be asking yourself, what exactly is a VFX turnover? And essentially, it is you turning over the plates and the pieces that the VFX vendor is going to need to make the visual effects shot, or shots, more likely. So the first step will be you, the visual effects editor or the first assistant, going through and making pieces for what we call a turnover package. So this will be QuickTime references of the scene or scenes, portions involved in the turnover, information on the plates that you'll be using. We'll talk a bit more about exactly what VFX plates are in a bit. Reference files like ball refs and stuff like that. And any other metadata and additional info that may be particularly useful to the vendors, so like the lens data, for example. Now, you're often not turning this over directly to the vendor. Usually this will be turned over to, what we would refer to as the lab, but it could be the, most often the post-production facility that you've been using for the shoot. The ones who will have backups of all of the source camera files. And what they're going to do is essentially take everything that you give them in your turnover package, and they'll make a whole bunch of VFX plates for the vendors to work on that are in OpenEXR format, and they are just the right length, plus any handles that you've agreed upon, but no longer. So, for example, if you've recorded a take that's, a full take might be 5, 6, 7 minutes long, however long the take is. But the visual effects shot could be, a matter of 50 frames. So if your visual effects shot's 50 frames and then you've got 8 frame handles on either side, then, you only actually need 66 frames in order to turn over. So a 66 frame OpenEXR image sequence, that'll be your plate that will get sent to the vendor, and that'll be what they receive and they'll work on. We'll also be building upon the VFX spreadsheet that we took a look at in the last module, since we'll be adding the plate data into that for the turnover for the vendors. But that's enough of an intro. Let's look at some stuff. Right, so we're coming back to the treasurer here that we used for AE100, and I've marked up 5 shots in the timeline which we're going to pretend were VFX shots. They weren't actually, but they could have been. So first up, we've got here, I've just named it TR10. I don't need to divide this into scenes or sections since it's a short film, so it's not going to be overly long. So just TR for a treasurer, and then the actual numeric value of the shot number. This one is a split screen. We're changing for performance here. I wanted the character of Martha to turn around a bit faster to sort of match the continuity of the second shot. In the actual original cut, this is actually a bit of a jump. So because there's some camera movement here, and we could maybe track this and work it out just with Animat, I'm going to pretend we're doing this as a visual effects shot because we want them to stitch these 2 parts together. This allows us to practice turning over 2 plates, which one will be for the foreground with Martha here, and one will be background. Now the rest of these shots that we're pretending are VFX shots are in the scene where Martha is waiting for Jerry, and she's sitting in her car, And we're going to pretend that we're going to ask the vendors to be making it raining in this scene to sort of suit the mood of the scene and what's going on. So anytime where we'd look outside the truck, we'd know that it would need to be raining, we'd need to see that. So I've marked up those shots and gave them sequential shot numbers, and you know, we're going to turn those over to our vendor. So let's get started. Right, so first things first, I'm going to make a duplicate of this sequence. So I'm just going to hit find bin, that's highlighted it there. I'll make a duplicate, got my copy here. And now I'm going to create 3 bins that I'm going to use to do this turnover. So first off, you should note that in my project, I've created a folder called VFX Turnovers. If you're on a larger series or a feature, the odds are you're going to do a number of turnovers. You're not going to turn over all the visual effects shots in one go. A number of them are going to be turned over before the edit's locked. Some of them after the lock. Some of them might need to be turned over more than once. You know, you might change the take you're using, which will, you know, necessitate having to turn over again. Or, you know, the shot might be extended in the edit after you've turned it over and it's beyond the amount of handles that you have. And then you would need to turn over all the information to the vendor once again. So definitely good to have a folder for doing your turnovers. And then I would have within that a folder for each turnover that you do. So I've got one here called turnover-01. Now you'll notice here that I already have 2 bins here, one called plates and one called refs. I am going to use these, but I'm going to update the date since it is the 19th. I did a full run through of this just to practice and you know, to make sure I wouldn't miss anything out when I did it for you guys. So let's just update the date and make sure that these are now empty, which they are. Cool. And I'm just going to create a 3rd one here. And call it working. Cool, right. So I'm going to take my duplicated sequence and I'm going to dump that into my working bin. And now the only bins I should have open are my turnover bins, turnover working, refs and plates, and my bin display bin, which is going to come in very useful later on. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave this colored red. I'm just going to call it master, just so that this is my master sequence here, and I'm going to dupe it before I start anything. This just is sort of the, if I make a mistake, if I mess anything up, if I accidentally delete anything, or if I mess up my sequence and I'm working and I need to go back, I don't need to open the edits bin again to get back to the source again. Right, so we essentially need to do 3 things. We need to isolate our VFX plates, we need to make some references, and we need to make EDLs and AAFs that the lab can use to conform the plates to the source material. So first off is I'm going to isolate my plates. And this would be a good time to properly explain what I mean by plates. Plates is just the term that's used in visual effects to denote like different layers of a composition. So compositing is one of the most common areas of visual effects. 2D compositing, where you'll get different layers of a shot, you know, the foreground and the background, you can composite them together. For example, if you're working on a shot where you've got a couple of actors in front of a green screen, then your main shot there that's filmed with the actors and the green screen, that's going to be your main plate, often referred to as your hero plate. And we would be labeling that FG01, foreground 01. That's your foreground plate. And then your background plate will be any background that the production has shot to be inserted there, or it might be a background that your visual effects vendor is going to create if it's going to be a digital background, or it might be one that you have to source from a stock library or somewhere else, but that would be your background plate. And that's basically all we mean when we talk about plates, is the different layers that's going to build up the visual effects shot. Even if we don't have multiple layers going on, like in this shot, we do have a foreground and a background plate to turn over. You know, in our other ones we don't. Even in these ones, we would still sub them out and we'd call them foreground 01. We'd call them a foreground plate. And then in visual effects, the vendors will add their own elements to it, like the rain and, you know, whatever else needs to be done in that particular instance. In our case, rain. You know, but we'd still refer to it as a plate. With me so far? Yeah? Cool? Okay, good. Moving on. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this. Essentially, what we want to do is make subclips of these shots. So if this base layer here is my background plate, this is Jerry's plate, then what I essentially want to do is match frame back, say go -8, if we want 8 frames, handles, a fairly common one. Go to the final frame, option match frame, and then go +8, mark out, then go to my bins, go to my plates bin, and subclip that out. That would be one way to isolate your plates, but this can be a slow method if you're doing this for every individual shot. If you're working on an action film, for example, you in one single turnover you might be doing 50 shots, and that could take a while. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, that is kind of my default way of doing it, even if I'm on something a bit larger, but I have got it scripted, so I press one button and it will do that process. For the sake of full disclosure, I'll show you running that script and what that would look like. And here we go. There we go. That says have the subclip with our 8-frame handles marked on, and then I could rename that and that would be my plate. Now, I could go into detail and show you how I made that script and how I like to do things, but I don't want to lean too heavily into that, since there is a fairly standardized method for this that is mostly made widely known by Master the Workflow and their series. There was a visual effects editor who learned from watching Master the Workflow, and then he taught this method to me, so have to give full credit to their method, which seems to be kind of industry-wide, well-known and standard. So, you know, I'll have them linked down below and you can check them out a bit more if you want to look at a lot more of their amazing lessons. They can give you beginning to end literally everything that you need to know for, you know, VFX editing and first assisting. They are a paid course, but they are very, very good. So yeah, full disclosure, this method that I'm going to show you is coming from them, but it is, you know, widely used around post. So let's take a look. So instead of subclipping like that, what I'm going to do is in my working bin, this duped sequence that I'm working on, I'm just going to call it something like plates, right? Then I'm going to get rid of everything that I don't need here. I'm just trying to isolate my plates, right? So in that case, I'm going to go and get rid of everything after here, right? And then I'll get rid of my audio tracks, don't need any of the audio. And then I'll just get rid of any additional video tracks that I don't need as well. So I'll get rid of these. Cool. Now you'll see essentially what I've got is here are my visual effects shots. I'm jumping to these by looking at the subcap that I've made for the VFX IDs. Now what we're going to do is clear all the other picture, all the other video information, and just leave what we're going to need for our plates. So to do that, I'm just going to hide V2 for a moment. I didn't delete it because I'm going to need it. One of my plates for this shot is in there. And I'm going to just have that selected, and I'm going to go Shift Command H. I'm just going to hide it for now. Then I'll select my track with my VFX IDs on it. Just clear that monarch just now. Then I'm going to just come over here to the left of the first one, and I'll go select right, right? Now, once you select right, it's selected everything on that track. Everything on that track is selected. But then if we hold Shift and Option and do it again, now it's only selected the gaps in between. And now, if we just do our move downward command, it's going to overwrite everything below it. And there we go. The only things that are left over here are our VFX shots. Then I can just come down here to my menu and go Show Tracks, re-enable V2, and there it is. And now we have all the information that we need to extract our plates and nothing else getting in the way or distracting us. This is a really, really useful method if you want to isolate just your visual effects shots for the plates, especially when there's a lot of them. You know, as long as you have your VFX IDs correctly and timely placed, and you don't have a really messy timeline, then you'll be able to isolate them all very, very quickly using this method. Now, next thing that we're going to do is if you've been using group clips, if you're using any kind of multicam workflow, then you're going to have to right click on the sequence and select Commit Multicam Edits. All this is going to do is it's going to replace any group clips with the source subclip or the source master clip, whatever side of the group is currently selected in the timeline, and get rid of the group. This sort of just enables the next step after this to work a lot better, and it enables sort of metadata to be read a bit more correctly as well. So we'll hit OK. It doesn't have to do it here because this was a single camera shoot, so there's no multicam. But if you had done that, then it would be a duplicated sequence afterwards with .no groups. So you'll select that new one and then go right click, decompose. And this is the main function that we're going to use in order to get our plate information here. So if you select decompose, then what this essentially does is it's going to create new clips based on what's on the timeline. And this is how we can configure it a bit here, but it's going to create new clips that are retimed to the duration that they're on our timeline. It's a good way to create subclips nice and fast. So I'm going to untick offline media only, and then I'm going to go captured and imported clips. It's kind of a bit older or irrelevant. We don't tend to capture quite as much anymore, but capture and imported clips. Basically, I just want this to apply to all clips on this timeline. And then down here, we've got our handle length. So here, we don't have to do plus or minus handles. We can get it to add it on during this process. So I'm just going to select 8. So it's going to add 8 frames handles at either side of the shot when it does this. And then we can hit OK. And it'll say selected sequences will be relinked to new offline master clips. That's fine. I'll hit OK. So we can see it's created a new timeline called Decomposed. And by default, after doing this, our master clips and our subclips, yes, they're offline, but we'll sort that right now. And we're going to do this by grabbing our plate sequence here before, where we've isolated our plates, and these ones are still online, still our subclips from the main edit. And I'm going to duplicate this and drop the copy into my bin display bin. Hey, Jack from the future here. So I just thought I'd jump in at this point and explain what's going on with this bin display bin, just in case any of you aren't familiar, in case you haven't used this function before. I do think I've shown it in other videos, but you might not have watched those. So here's our bin display bin here. You can see I've dropped in a sequence, and then it's populating the bin with all the clips in that sequence. And if I delete that sequence and hit save, all those clips go away. Now this is done, you can do this in any bin, by the way. You can set any bin to do this. It's just right click somewhere in the bin and then come down here to set bin display. Now in this menu we can set what will appear in the bin, what the bin is going to display. So by default down here there's this option called show reference clips, which by default is off. And what this function show reference clips actually means is any clips that are being referenced by a particular sequence will be shown in the bin. Now you can show literally anything being referenced by the sequence through to renders, map keys, 3D clips, group clips, or just a specific selection of the above. So for us, I would normally just have maybe master clips and subclips selected, if I'm just looking to grab the sources. For the purposes of what we're actually trying to go for in this video, we probably only needed subclips selected, but I have one bin display that's always set up in every project I work on that just has show reference clips enabled, and then I tick sequences, subclips, and master clips, and I just always have those enabled, and then I can just open up this bin display bin and drop any sequence into it and get the sources whenever I want. It's really, really handy. I have it down in my assistant folder, colored purple, just like my filters bin, since these two bins are sort of like utilities to me that I'll just grab and use for, whenever I need them for a specific task. So that's what's going on with the bin display bin. Now that that's explained, back to the main video. I'm going to hit save. You can see it's brought up the sources here. So this is all the source clips that are being referenced in that timeline. And what we want to do here is select the source camera files, because this is what we're going to use to relink these newly created subclips. and then just jump back to your working bin. And these subclips here, we're just going to go right click, relink managed media. And instead of selecting drives and dealing with this different information here about relinking to different projects and whatnot, the main thing that we have to tick is selected items in all open bins. And this just means when it tries to do the relink, it's going to look at any items that you've got selected in various bins, and it's going to point directly and try to relink to those. And then I'm just going to change source name down here to tape name or source file name. I just find that tends to work a bit better. Untick match case, and yep, that'll be me. So if I hit OK now, you can see the name of my RAID drive has appeared here under drive, which means these have all now come online. Now, at this stage, I'd like to point out a couple of things to be aware of when you're using the decompose method to make your VFX subclips. And the first one is whenever you've got respeeds. So here I've got some shots that were shot at 120 frames per second. We've sped them up to be a little bit faster, even though it's still slow-mo. And if I was to use the decompose method on this, then yes, I would get 8-frame handles from this point. From this frame, I'll get an extra 8-frame handles. But because of the respeed, if that same respeed is going to be applied at the other end, which is probably going to be one of the first things the vendor does, they're going to apply the respeed before they start doing the visual effects work. They're certainly going to run out of frames, and they're not going to be able to provide 8-frame handles on the delivered visual effects shot. So I would strongly recommend, if there's respeeds, what you would do is avoid the decompose method altogether, drag the shot up, select it with your double roller, and then I just go -8 frames. It's just going to roll it out while keeping your respeed there. Jump to the other side, +8 frames. Now you have the full duration that you want to use for your delivery for your plate. And now once we've rolled it out and we have the proper duration, in order to get around the respeed, to get a proper clean subclip of that full recorded piece of media, since they're going to do the respeed again at their end, we're going to go match frame on the head frame, then come back to your timeline, jump to the end frame, hold option and do match frame again, and then this way it does match frame, but it doesn't erase your earlier mark in when you did your first match frame. Then you hit mark out, and then you can subclip from there, and then that subclip will be your plate, and you can rename that and send that to your visual effects house. The other thing that you need to watch out for is what we refer to as cutbacks. See here where we have two visual effects shots that are coming back to the same shot, right? Now we're jumping back to the same shot, and we're actually jumping back to the same take. Now, if with these, if I bring these up and I add my handles at this end, and I go +8, and then I go -8. If these portions here were to overlap in any way, like there's repeated frames, including in the handle area, then when we run our decompose, it's going to link them to the same source clip, and then it could end up just making one subclip for the two of them, or it'll make the subclip twice, but it's including that full duration across the two subclips, because they do overlap as to where the decompose is looking at in that handle range. So if you have a shot that's cutting back twice, then it's just something to watch out for. You might have to run your decompose twice, once on one section, once on the other, to avoid it. You should notice it once you go through and you start renaming your plates and they don't all entirely line up, but just something to keep an eye out for. The Master the Workflow video on VFX Subclipping, which is free on YouTube, actually goes into that in good detail and demonstrates it quite well. I'll have that link down below. So now we have subclips trimmed to the exact length of our visual effects shot, plus 8-frame handles that are online. These will be the plates that we will use. So those duplicated master clips, we can get rid of those out of the bin. Don't need those. And now I'm going to go back to my decompose sequence and come to the first one. What I'll do is I'll just jump into my subcap, copy that VFX ID there, and then come back here and I'm going to go match frame, find bin on the background plate first, which will of course take me to one of my newly created subclips. And I can just rename that the VFX ID, and then I'll go underscore background underscore version 01. I'll do the same with the foreground plate. And we're hunky-dory. And now we've got our first two plates isolated and named correctly. So I'm just going to change the color of these here. I'm going to color these blue. That's how I normally color them. And we'll see why in a little bit. But you can see they've changed color here in my timeline. Right now, for now, that just sort of isolates the ones that have been completed, the ones that we've renamed and done. If you're doing a whole lot of these, they might not necessarily be in order. When you're doing your match frame find bin to get to the next plate, it can be dancing up and down around. So color coding the ones that have already been completed, a designated color, can help just to keep your mind straight. So we know FG represents foreground, and version 01 is just because if this shot gets extended past the point of the duration, or they slide the portion of the plate they're using, we're going to have to redeliver it, and then that'll be version 2 of the foreground plate. And as I'm saying this, I realize I've forgotten something, so dial it back a second, and I'll add that in. Yep, there we go. So you can see I've added in here a 01 after our background and foreground. And this is if we change the take that we're using. If we can change the take completely, but it's still, same, it's still similar enough that it's still the same visual effects shot. So for example, here we have the car sitting here. We want rain to be coming. Let's say we change the take because we didn't like the position of the car. It's still the same visual effects shot, but we now have a new foreground plate that we're going to be using. It's not version 2 of the foreground plate, it's a whole new one, so it'll be foreground 02 version 1. That's how I'd name that. So we're going to continue on naming these and coloring them as we go to isolate our plates. If they're mostly foreground plates that you're doing, then you can just sort of copy one after you do it, and then go, match frame, find bin, paste it in, and then just update the shot ID number. Cool. There we have it. We have all of our plates lined up here, nice and easy. So what I'm going to do now in the same sequence is I'm going to put the playhead just before the first one here, and I'm going to hold the Option key and select right. And this time we've selected all the actual clips and not the gaps, so the reverse of what we did before. And I'm going to go to my filters bin where I have saved an effect called superimpose 0%, which is essentially just the superimpose effect with the opacity dialed to 0. So all we're doing is making these clips invisible. If I hold the Command key and double click this, then that gets applied to all of those selected shots. Hunky dory. Now what I'm going to do is double click my subcap effects one by one and just hold Command for snapping and drag our hero plate up inside the subcap. Now, if you have markers to denote the visual effects shots on top of the subcap, I just recommend changing what track they're on before you do this, like so, just in the markers window, and going change track. So I'm just going to put these on, say, V7 for now, just put on the track above. And that's because if you open up your subcap and you drag it in the markers there, it's going to erase the marker. Whereas if we do it this way, we can drag them all in. Need to do them one by one, I'm afraid. And then you can put the markers back down a track and put them back on. Like so. Change track. V5. There we go. Now we have our markers straight back on there. And now the reason that we're doing this is because in a minute we're going to cut these VFX IDs here back onto the main edit timeline so that they're there as a reference. And it serves multiple functions. First one is that you can see that all of your colored VFX IDs are the ones that where the visual effects shots are turned over. So you know those ones are already turned over, so the ones that don't have a color still need to go to the vendor. So you can see that right in your timeline without looking at your spreadsheet or your shot grid or whatever else. Secondly, it means if they keep your sync locks on while they're working, then they'll be able to see where their handles end, because these subclips of these plates end at the handles. So if they're trying to roll out a shot and make an edit change and it stops at that point, and they know that they can't ask the VFX vendor to do any more work, then they know that's where their handles end and that's where they need to park it. So it just provides a lot of very useful information and guidelines within the main edit for the editor and for the edit team without having to reference any other information. So let's throw this back on the edit so they have that information. So I'll just grab my decompose sequence that I'm working with here, throw that into the source monitor, and then I'll just open up my lot cut or wherever you got your edit from. And I'm going to jump to my first visual effects shot, which was here. And I'm going to cut these in on a layer above or below. You're going to want to cut this on an empty layer so that you're not disturbing any other visual effects shots that you might not have turned over. They might not be ready yet, and they might be in between the ones that you're dumping here. So if I cut this in like so, and then they're on right where they're supposed to be. If I had just cut them in straight onto the timeline where they're supposed to go, then if we had some visual effects shots here and here and here, those would have been overwritten, and that would have been a problem. We always want to be as non-destructive as possible, guys. But once we have that done, we can just throw them back up to where they're supposed to be. These ones we can do together. Just select there. And then boom. And now that's the main edit timeline updated. They know which ones have been turned over. And they have that reference information. Now, in an ideal world, you're probably going to be doing this after the editor has left for the day. And you're probably going to do this at the end of the turnover process. You probably won't do it at this point, just in case your turnover gets interrupted and you didn't actually get to send it, or if you have to redo anything. You probably want to do this last in terms of putting it back on, because this is a marker that you've done it. So yeah, just pretend we did this at the end. But getting back to our turnover, we've got all these plates here, and I'm going to throw these into my plates bin. Now you'll see this plates bin has a different layout here. I'm just going to extend it so you can see all the columns. And I'll drag this out and make it larger so you can see all the information that we've got. So this is about what it should look like. So first off, we've got our name of our shot here. We have a little frame reference for us to look at. We've got start and end time code and duration time code. We have our tape name, so our source file, that'll be useful. Lens data. Now this wasn't recorded in this particular short film, neither from the camera, there was no paperwork, and that wasn't involved during the initial shoot, and we didn't have ALEs. So this information isn't particularly in this metadata here, so I've just put an XX on all the source clips. But really this is probably going to say something like 50mm, 75mm. It might be in a different format depending on the camera or how it's been recorded, but as long as your AE has ingested it with ALEs and got all that metadata from the camera, because the lens data, especially for doing compositions and adding stuff in, is really, really essential for the VFX vendors to get the focal point right. I've left the frame rate in there for now, but I mean, it's not that essential to have it in here. They should know what the frame rate is. Handle length, I'll just select all and go right click, set handle length, and put 8. Frame count, duration, end and start. So I'm just going to reorder these quickly, and then for these to be correct, we're going to want to set the start frame count. And as very often in visual effects, your frame count start will begin at 1001. It just makes it sort of easier to track. It gives them plenty of headroom if they want to add frames at the start, and for them to, you know, extend later on down the line. So we'll go frame count start 1001, which also means that their working frame start is 1009, you know, outside of your handle frames. But as long as we make the change here, frame count start 1001, then Avid's going to be able to track that accurately in the timeline and add, metadata readers and EDLs correctly with the exact frame information that's going to match what the vendors are going to use in Maya or Nook or whatever else. And we're going to have to put that same information over into this VFX column here as well. Now we can't do this batch, so we're just going to go dash 1001, and I'll hit enter. And then you'll see it gets put in like this. And then I'll just go copy and just hitting the enter key to go down one and then paste. So that's all in. And that's so that the timecode window or Avid's metadata readers up here can display this VFX information correctly. It doesn't always work quite as well doing it from the frame count for some reason. So I put it in there, VFX. And lastly, I'm going to have a column called VFX Notes, where I'm just going to add in some information as to what it is that the VFX vendor is supposed to do in this particular shot. So for the first two, there's the two plates for the same shot, so they get the same entry, and that's going to be stitched together plates for performance. So I'm stitching together these two plates for performance reasons as opposed to for a visual look. That's why I've noted it like that. And this is just a sort of summary. It's an overall idea. You're not giving them really detailed VFX notes. Your VFX producer or your director can work that out with them, as long as it's sort of clear what, what's going on in a basic sense. So for the other ones, I'm just going to say add rain to shot. Sweet. Hey, Jack from the future again. Now this one really bothered me that I neglected to show it in the video, so I had to fix it here. So when we are in our plates bin, before we're getting ready, before we export any ALEs, the one thing that I would feel like has to be added here is just to the right of our name column. I would go right click, add custom column, and I would add a column for the VFX shot number. So let's say VFX shot number. You can call it VFX ID, you can call it whatever you like. And then I would copy and paste the shot number from the plate names into this column. Now, generally speaking, I would write a script for this. I do think I actually showed a script doing this in one of my YouTube Shorts videos. And the reason why we would do this will become very apparent when we go to import this information into our spreadsheet. And I'll jump back into the video at that point. See you then. So now we have our plates, we've got our metadata all in. If you're on a film, by the way, or if you're on a long form series, you might have some more information here, like the scene number. I can add that in here actually, just by selecting the metadata column. Yep, there we go. Right, now we can start exporting some stuff. I'm going to go File, Output, Export Bin. I'm going to change this to tab delimited just to make it a little clearer at the other end. So this will be our main folder where we're exporting, everything for this turnover package. And the first thing I'm exporting here is the metadata of the bin. So there we go. That's exported. That's in there. So now I'll just hold Option and drag this back in here. So I've got all my plates. I'll also probably export a little H.264 reference of all of these as well. Yeah, let's do that. So I'll select all my plates and go export H.264. Sweet. Right, so next up, we're going to make part of the turnover called the pull package. And the pull package in this case will consist of a QuickTime reference of all of the plates, an EDL with the plate information, the frame count information, as well as a linked AAF. So to do that, I'm going to start by, in my working bin, I'm going to create a new sequence. And I'm just going to name it turnover, and the date, and then plates ref. So on this sequence, I'm going to go to my plates bin, just I'll select all of these. I'm going to hit G to clear marks just in case there is any, and drop them on there. And we're only going to need 2 video tracks for this, so I'm just going to delete all the rest of these. And we'll do our QuickTime reference first, which is just going to be a QuickTime reference of the plates with a number of burn-ins. So I'm going to make this into a single monitor, so as you can see what the burn-ins are that I'm adding. So I'll start by just dropping a timecode generator effect on the top layer here, and then let's cycle through the burn-ins that one. Right, so first up, we're going to need the plate name. So we'll make our first one source clip name, because these are going to be the names of the plates. And I'll make this a bit bigger, and I'll throw it up in the top left corner. Sweet, we've got our plate name. Next up, I'll do my tape name. So this is going to be the source camera file name. Now, this is part of our commonality and the stuff that I've talked about before. So for this, I just need to go source bin column. And then under the bin column, I'll select tape. So now I've got our source camera file name. So I'll make that the same size, and this will go in the bottom left corner. Right, now we're also going to need some references for this. So first off, we're going to grab source timecode. And the purpose of this pool package, by the way, is for the lab or the facility that has the backups of all your source media. It's for them to create the proper plates from the source camera material, so they'll most likely be in an OpenEXR format to be transferred over to the vendor. So you'll send this information, the pool package, to the lab. They'll create the plates in EXR, and then they'll forward that onto the vendor. The rest of your turnover, the references and things, they'll get sent straight to the vendor. But this part here is for the lab, so we're giving them all the information they need. And so for our last counter here, we're going to add the information that we put in the VFX column earlier in order to get an accurate frame count. Now, we're not going to use a frame count start, where we've put 1001 in there as well, because there's a bit of an issue with this resetting at 1001 for each individual clip. Like we'll show you here, we'll go to source frame count start. It's on the current track, so it's reading V1. So it shows 1001 here, we can see. But then as we scroll along, it doesn't reset to 1001 on the next clip, even though it should be reading this clip now, and that starts at 1001. So instead, to get around that, we're going to go up into our display, and we're going to come down here to other counters. And then down here, where we select our counter, what our other counter is reading, we're going to select VFX. So here we are, we've got our counter here. And now I'll make this the same size as the other readers. And I'm going to place this in the lower right corner. And now with that done, we should get an accurate frame counter across all the shots. We'll see here as we jump to the next shot, it resets to 1001 again. So if I jump to the first frame of every shot here, 1001. 1001 every time. Accurate frame counter. And of course you could use the text field to create a watermark as well if you like so. Now this step might not necessarily be essential, since you'll be sending this to the lab, which has access to all the source material anyway, but just for the sake of sending files around over the internet, if you're uploading this to them, just might be a bit safer, because it should make no difference to them. This is just giving them a visual reference of the material that they're restoring, probably either from a server or from LTO tape of the source rushes in order to make these plates. So they've got a frame accurate reference from a frame count of the plate that you've generated. They have the source time code, they have the source clip file name, and they have your plate name. All that burn-in, so that should be all the references that they need in order to restore this plate to send to the vendor. So now that's all ready to go, I'm just going to export this out as an H.264 to my turnover folder. And you can see here I've actually divided my turnover information into 2 folders. I've got my ref folder here with all my references of the individual plates, as well as a folder specifically for this pull package that we're doing here. So I'll export that into there. Then, as I said before, we're also going to open our list tool under tools, and we'll load up there V1. And this is the preset that I'll use for these sort of EDL visual effects turnovers. If I go into my list options, you can see the only thing I've got ticked here is under both picture and sound. I've got clip names and frame count. Those are the only things that are ticked and enabled, and I'm using file 129. And so we get our plate name, we get our source clip name for each individual entry, and we get frame count, start, end, and duration. So just all the relevant pertinent information needed to restore these plates. So we'll go save list to one file and drop it in my pull folder. And lastly, we'll give them a Vision AAF as well, which is just an AAF video track selected and just linked, so no media. And I'll save that in the same place. And there's our pull package complete with all the references that our lab will need in order to make the plates for the vendors. But speaking of references, we're also going to have to export some references for the vendor. And I don't just mean of the individual plates, I mean references of the scene. This is for a few reasons. They're going to want to see the scene in context so that they've got like an idea of how their visual effects fits into the surrounding shots. They're not necessarily going to want to open up a screener viewing export of the whole film every time and scrub to it. It's very handy for them to have an up-to-date export of the scene to go with that turnover. And as well, it gives them a reference of any resizing that you've done on the shot in the offline. It gives them a reference of that so that they can match that in the visual effects side if that's necessary. It may be more necessary for re-speeds and timing purposes, but for resizes and things like that, formatting, timing, placement, they might also want to match that as well. So let's have a look at how we go about that. First things first though, before I would make this reference, I'm going to come over to my timeline and I'm going to grab my plates. I'll put this back to a dual monitor here. And I'm going to slap the foreground plate for each individual shot, the hero plate. I'm going to put it on my timeline. So I'll load up my first plate. I'm going to go +8 frames and I've got VFX loaded as a reader up here. So I know 1009, that's where the shot should begin. So that shot should match what we have here. For at least one of the sides. It matches Martha's side. It's a little hard to see there, but we can see that Jerry's a bit different on the left than he is on the right. So I'm going to slap this on there, and then I'll roll it back, and then we'll do just a little jog up and down, monitoring the two tracks to check that our foreground does match, and it does indeed. So we're at the right frame point. It matches Martha because she doesn't move at all. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the subcap that we have here that we made earlier for our burn-in. I'm just going to click and drag. I'll hold Alt while I do it so that the shot doesn't move. And I'll click and drag our plate and put it in there. So it's in the subcap. So now that that's in there, I'll just jump to the next one, which is Treasurer 20. And I'll do the same thing. +8. Cut in on the track below. Do a visual check that it's the same. And it is. Then roll it back and drag it in. And be wary before you do this, by the way, that you might want to open up your markers and move them to a different track so you can move them all to V6 before you do this, just because otherwise when you drag your plate inside the subcap, it's going to overwrite the marker. So if you move them to another track, do this, and then you can add them back at the end. You'll have that way they won't get removed. So I'm just going to jump ahead and do the rest of these, but I'll leave it on at sped up speed so you can see what I'm doing. Right, now that we've got that done, we have our plates inside all of our subcaps here, and we can quickly jump to them with our markers. We can see that they're blue. I always color it blue because then I can see that that shot's been turned over. After the shots with the vendors, they'll generally send me back what's called a version 0, which is not even the first version of the shot. It's just they've laid it in, they've checked the formatting that it's correct and it's got all the correct frames, they have what they need, and then they export it out and send it to us just so that we can test bringing stuff in and we can double check their work, that all the frames match and that they've got the right material. and then I'll replace what's in the subcap with the version 0, and I'll color those orange. And so then I can sort of track what stage it's at. And then when I get an actual visual effects shot back, that'll be colored another color, maybe lilac or something. Just so that, you know, visually, even before I zoom in, I know what stage any visual effects shot is at in the film by the color of the subcap on the timeline. But getting back to our references, which is what the section is meant to be about, I'm going to first sub out this scene here, because we're going to do this by scene, just so they have what they need. And they have context for their visual effects. So I'll sub out this scene first. And I'm just going to name this after the turnover, the date, and then scene 15 ref. While I'm here, I'll also subclip out the other shot. And this one I won't do the whole scene, I'll just grab a few shots either side since it's just one shot. That will give them plenty of context. They just need to know that they're having this conversation and what's going on. So I'll sub that out as well, and then just change that to scene 1. So jumping into the scene 15 one for a second, we're going to reconfigure the burn-ins that are on here. So I'll change this to show single monitor. At the moment I've got timecodes. I've got the subcap of the shot number, so that's good, we want that, and page break productions burn-in. So I'll change my time code because it's formatted weird at the moment, and I'll put that in the middle here. Then I'll just add my plate name, and I'll put that right up the top left corner here. So we have our plate name. And I'll also add the same reference that we did before of the frame counter. So I'll just go to other counters here and then come down here and go visual effects. And I'll also throw that in the same place I did before, just in this lower right corner as well. And a couple of things to know about your frame counter and your plate reader here is that these are both going to have to be pointed at you know, the track that has your plates on, in this case V5. And you also might want to remove this part of the reader from any areas of your timeline here where there isn't a plate. Because otherwise, I'll scroll my playhead over here, you'll see it's just showing a clip name, and you'll see down here, there's no plate data, so it's just showing, you know, no column data. So I would fix this. It can be a bit tedious, but I'll just add an edit here. In between all of these, and then I'll come to the first one and I'll tweak that. So I'll just disable these two, so it's just leaving the time code and the burn-in, and then I'll just drag this onto the other instances where there's no plates. Now, if you had heaps of these instances, what you could do is just drag this out into a bin and then select all these instances in your timeline and then go hold your command key and double click that preset, and it will get applied to all those places. You know, that would be how you would sort of batch apply it. So that's just how you would keep it nice and tidy. So you're only really showing the readers for the plate when there's a plate there to read from. But once you've got all that set up and done, you can export this out as an H.264, and of course that will go in with your refs, not in your pull package. So I'll export that out now. And then that way they have an ideal reference for their material, what's getting, in order to check and match what needs to go where. This is particularly useful if later on you are giving an updated reference. Maybe the cut had changed, but they still have enough handles. And maybe the shot doesn't start at 1009. Maybe you've eaten into the handles a bit, and it now starts at 1001, or it starts a bit later. So that that's reflected in your reference. They should know exactly how much of the handles they have and where the shot starts in terms of the plate that you have given them. And we'll now go to our scene 1 ref and do the same thing there. But you'll see up here, I've now saved the presets of both of these different variations of this burn-in layout, and I'll use it in this turnover when I'm doing the other one. So I just need to come up here and add a couple of edits around the one shot where we need it. So the one with our plates here, then the two instances without the plates doesn't need it. So there we go, that one's all done and that one's nice and fast. And we'd probably save these in our filters bin or like a common visual effects bin. You know, have a bin with all of your VFX presets so that you can just drag and drop them out. If you're on a production where you're going to be doing a number of turnovers, these are definitely a couple that I would recommend you have ready and waiting that you can just slap on as you need them so you don't have to configure it each time. Right, now that we've got everything that we need for our turnover, we've got our information for our VFX pool for the lab, and we've got our reference information that the vendor's going to use. Now I'll show you how we'll update our VFX spreadsheet nice and easily to show this plate information, which they'll need to have as a reference. So I'm going to take this text file that we made, which is an export of the Avid bin with our Avid bin of our plates. I'm going to right click that and I'm going to open that. I'm going to use numbers, but you could use any spreadsheet, software to do this. And let me take a look here. So, hey, Jack from the future, back again. Told you I would be. And that's just to show you what we do with this VFX shot number information. So here we can see a different exported version of that bin that we looked at earlier. But the only difference being that VFX shot number, as you saw me enter in the bin earlier, is present here. Now, this is really important because this is what I would make as our most important frame on the left here. This would be my main sorting frame, is the shot number, not the plate necessarily. And that's because later on when the vendor or yourself or whoever is looking for the plate information for a specific VFX shot, they can sort this by the VFX shot number and then go looking at the plates that are available on that shot number. Now, it is true that these plate names do begin with the shot number, so it would still chronologically sort that way anyway, but you just want them to be tagged and sorted by the VFX shot number anyway, since that's the primary unifying piece of key information that unifies all of this data. So you want the VFX shot number to be there in the plates view as well as later on in your main VFX tracker view, since that's our primary leading piece of information. What will always be referred back to as the shot number. So if you add that into your bin earlier on, then this just becomes a quick, drag column over to the left, then that's your sorting one. So there's another thing I would add. Going to change name to VFX shot. Just making some quick tweaks here before I add it into our Google spreadsheet. Get rid of the frame column as well because we don't need that. So I've got VFX shot, start, end, duration, tape, lens, frame rate, scene, handle length, frame count, start, end, and duration, VFX information we don't need, and VFX notes. Cool. All right, so I'll delete that. And then I'm actually just going to add 3 columns here. Add columns after our frame information. And so the first one is going to be working start, then working end, and working duration. You might have different terms for these. I think working is a bit of a misnomer, but it's the first one that I was taught to use, so I've sort of stuck with it. It's just we're referencing the amount of the plate or the visual effects shot minus the handles. So for start, that's going to be 1001 plus 8. 1009, which we can copy into all of the start columns. They're all going to be the same. For end, that's going to equal the frame count end minus 8. So just tap the frame count end cell, go minus 8. Now I can apply that same formula to all of these. There we go. And our working duration is going to equal frame count duration minus the handles at both ends, so 16. And there we go. So the working duration will be how long the VFX shot should currently be in the cut. And you can confirm this by comparing it to your VFX spreadsheet, which should already have all that duration information. So that should be correct there. Now, that's all looking very good to me. Now I'm going to export this out. You could export it out as an Excel doc or a CSV. I'm going to use Excel for now. Export it to my reference folder where our turnover information is. And then I'm going to upload this to my Google Drive. Got an empty space ready here. Then I can right click and open this with Google Sheets. Cool. We've got all our information. And down here in the name of the sheet, I'm just going to rename this to make it a bit clearer. So I'm just going to call it TR_T turnover 1. So get rid of the rest of the information. And then I'll go plates, since this is the plate information for turnover 1. Then all I need to do to add this to my spreadsheet, which I have open here, I've named it AE204 VFX tracker. I'll just come back to my plates and go right click on this sheet and go copy to existing spreadsheet. And then just find the one you want to copy it to. So I've got AE204 here, VFX tracker, and go insert. Sheet copied successfully. So then if I jump back to that spreadsheet, we can see it here. It's renamed it copy of, so I'll just get rid of that. For future reference, you're probably better doing your renaming here for that reason. And now we have all the plate information for turnover 1 here, all consolidated for the vendor to see, nice and easy. So now we can come to our VFX tracker tab and we can update some information here. So shot status, we can change to turned over, since we've now made our turnover and this will be sent to the vendor. You'll want to select what vendor this is. I've made up one called Super VFX, but I don't like that they're the same color, so I'm going to change this to another made up one called Amazing Studios. So Amazing Studios has got these turned over shots, and then I usually have a column right at the end just for turnover number. And in this cell, I'm just going to insert a hyperlink to this sheet here, because if we end up doing 10, 15 turnovers, it allows us to have a nice quick clickable link that will take us straight to all the plate information for that particular VFX shot. So to do that, I'm just going to select the cell, go insert, link, just type in the text turnover -01, so the turnover number. Don't need any more than that. And then sheets and name ranges, plates. Sweet. I can paste that in all of these. So now they have a nice clickable button that will take them to all of the plate information for any of these particular visual effects shots. So maybe looking at, shot 20, they click on that, then they can see, oh, there's 20. There's all the plate information. Nice and easy. Now you're probably going to have a whole bunch more visual effects shots here. I've not made up more of them, but say you've got ones for a different vendor, that are at different statuses. Some of them might be final, they might be omitted or changed. There might be other ones that are awaiting turnover, and then once you've done them, you'll input, their turnover number. And if you have to redeliver any of the ones you've already delivered, like up here, then say I only had to redeliver this one because we changed out the take. Then the first thing I would do before I start doing any turnovers or anything is I would change this to awaiting turnover, change the status back so as they can see that in the live readout of all our plate information. And then after I redo it in the new turnover, I will update this link here to link it to the plate information for the up-to-date turnover for the plate information that they're supposed to be using for this visual effects shot, the current up-to-date one. But that would have our VFX info all up to date. As I said before, if you had more metadata available, like your lens data, like your lens data, your camera, model number that was used, the LUT that was used, the color space that you recorded in, all of that good stuff. If you have that available in the metadata, have that in your bin view and export it with the ALE, and it will be here as well, available to them to see. But there we go. That would be a full visual effects turnover. This particular spreadsheet and method that I've used recently on an action film, and it all worked out perfectly fine. And it's not as fancy as using a code book or as using like ShotGrid or something like that, but it does the job if you're in a pinch and you don't have access to those platforms. Right, everyone, so that does bring us to the end of this video doing VFX turnovers. This is, a very basic turnover in the most basic sense, but it should give you all of the most important details and the most important techniques and workflows down in order for you to improve upon, or in order for you to deliver a turnover at a higher standard or a more specific spec. It covers all the main points and all the main ideas. So I'm really hoping that you've learned something from this, that somebody's found it useful. And before I go, a really, really, really huge thank you to everyone who supports on Patreon. It's always incredibly helpful and incredibly flattering, really. Always sort of makes my day whenever I see anyone else join. So thank you, really appreciate that. And thank you to everybody watching here as well. Always do appreciate it. And, when you're done with this epically long video, you can check out some of the other ones on the channel if you haven't already. But that's it for me today, guys. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one.